Good afternoon. Hello and welcome to our panel session, Understanding the Operational Landscape. My name is Kristen Jordan, and I am the Deputy Director of the Biological Technologies Office. The Biological Technologies Office was founded in 2014 to develop capabilities that embrace the unique properties of biology: adaptation, replication, and complexity. Research in our office applies those properties to revolutionize how the United States protects and enables its warfighters. The foundational technologies in BTO are synthetic biology, infectious disease, and neurotechnology. Today, we continue to initiate research in these areas as the office has grown over the years. But BTO is just one of 6 technical offices at DARPA, all with the overall mission to make pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for the warfighter and for national security. We've heard this before, but DARPA works within an innovation ecosystem that includes academic, industry, and government partners to create new strategic opportunities and novel tactical capabilities. Today, we're going to highlight a few of our current technology investments and discuss future opportunities to address the changing operational landscape that our military is facing. Everything from the global geopolitical landscape to the climate itself is changing, and this impacts the operational landscape of the warfighter. To prepare for and adapt to these changes, we need innovative technologies that will ensure our military can maintain operations on land, in the air, and at sea, despite a changing battle space. What will logistics look like in 10 years when our troops are deployed overseas? Chances are logistics requirements such as resupply of food, water, and medicine will be very different and more challenging. What about the impacts of climate change on Department of Defense infrastructure? For example, bases that are located in lower-lying coastal areas. How can we protect and fortify our assets against sea level change and extreme weather events? These are the questions and the challenges that inspire DARPA to develop cutting-edge technologies to ensure that the DoD will continue to have all mission success across all the services. To discuss these questions today, I have the pleasure of sharing the stage with Colonel Benjamin Bishop of the United States Air Force and Colonel Trent Mills of the United States Army. The military special assistants to the director serve as liaisons between their respective branches of the military and DARPA, fostering relationships and helping us drive our technology forward into relevant areas. You will often hear us refer to them as our liaison officers, or LNOs. In total, we have 5 active duty LNOs from different branches of the military serving at DARPA, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Special Operations, and soon, Space Force. Each LNO is an expert in their respective battle spaces, and their collective input helps to guide and shape our technology investments across the whole agency. In addition to Colonel Bishop and Colonel Mills, we are privileged to also be joined by Colonel Nathan Marvel of the United States Marine Corps and Captain Jason Weed of the United States Navy. Colonel Marvel has previously served as a DARPA LNO from 2018 to 2020, while Captain Weed currently serves as a Commodore for the Unmanned Undersea Vehicle Squadron 1 and collaborates with us frequently on multiple current DARPA programs. Our close partnership with operators in the military services, such as Captain Weed, provide us the boots-on-the-ground perspective of the relevancy and tactical capabilities of the technologies that we develop. We scientists don't come up with solutions in isolation without operational context or mission need. We work with our LNOs and other military leaders who provide invaluable perspectives and resources to our program managers. Our LNOs allow us a peek into their worlds, so our program managers have a better understanding of where the opportunities lie for DARPA to tackle the really hard challenges across the entire Department of Defense. At DARPA, we ask these hard questions and explore innovative technical approaches to solve problems that ultimately become our high-risk, high-payoff research programs. The LNOs and military collaborators are a critical resource for the entire agency, and for this conversation today, we'll talk about how they have inspired the development of select program concepts within BTO that address the challenges of a changing operational environment such as logistics and climate change. A growing theme that we are hearing from recent conversations with our LNOs has been the need for the Department of Defense to operate anywhere, anytime. With that goal in mind, our program managers have set out to address this need. When our LNOs told us about the complicated logistics that warfighters have to deal with just to have food and water when deployed, two programs were created. The Atmospheric Water Extraction, or OWE program, seeks to develop technology that will extract enough potable water from the air to sustain the warfighter in forward operating environments, even in dry, arid conditions. Similarly, the Resource Program is researching technologies to turn single-use plastics into macronutrients and lubricants. This will allow warfighters to repurpose their trash for other needed materials, including food in the field. With these programs, we will be able to provide water, food, and other materials to our warfighter anywhere, anytime. Our LNOs also helped us understand all the complications that come with getting blood into the battlefield to support the injured warfighter. Battlefields of tomorrow may not be able to depend on robust supply chains to transport whole blood to those who need it. One of our program managers in BTO is an active duty physician himself, and he worked closely with our LNOs to develop his program, F-Sharp, which stands for Fieldable Solutions for Hemorrhage with Bioartificial Resuscitation Products. This program seeks to develop a whole blood substitute that does not rely on cold chain, helping us to heal and sustain our warfighters anywhere, anytime. Climate change is being considered by the Department of Defense. For example, naval infrastructure being degraded by encroaching shorelines. That might seem, and it is, an impossible problem to overcome. But at DARPA, we do the impossible every day. And one of our program managers in BTO was inspired by this problem and developed the ReFence program. This program seeks to create self-healing, hybrid biological, and engineered reef-mimicking structures to mitigate coastal flooding, erosion, and storm damage. These are issues that both increasingly threaten DoD and civilian infrastructure. Our naval LNO has connected the ReFence team with Marine Corps and Navy installations across the globe, which will drive the transition of this technology to those who need it most. Our LNOs also hammered home to us a crucial tenet that being able to operate anywhere, anytime is the need for flexible and adaptable infrastructure. Our solution was to repurpose nature itself with our Engineered Living Materials, or ELM program. ELM seeks to revolutionize military logistics and construction in remote, austere, high-risk, and possibly post-disaster environments. The technology is developing living biomaterials that combine the structural properties of traditional building materials with attributes of living systems. This can lead to construction materials with the ability to rapidly grow in place, self-repair, and adapt to the environment. Today, DARPA technology from this program can create a functional expeditionary runway or landing pad on any loose gravel, dirt, or sand within 48 hours. And once again, we're helping the warfighter operate anywhere, anytime. This is incredible, right? And as I alluded to, the amazing technology we are investing in today was made possible by those conversations that we've had with our LNOs and our military collaborators. The insights from their respective battle spaces allows the technology offices across DARPA to understand the coming changes in the operational landscape, giving us a head start solving the problems of tomorrow today. While all of these programs DARPA has already initiated, we want to look towards the future operating environment and new areas of opportunities. Now we're going to hear from our panelists. At the end, we will answer your questions as they come over the DARPA Forward virtual event platform. I hope today, in this panel, you are inspired by the dialogue and the conversation. We want to hear your questions, and we want to see if maybe you have ideas that could be solutions to the topics that we'll be discussing today. And who knows, maybe from conversations that we'll have here today, a DARPA program idea can be born in this very room. So I'm going to bring out our panelists, and first I would like to introduce Captain Weed, Captain Marvel, Colonel Bishop, Colonel Mills. They're going to share some insights into their mission spaces and where their respective services are looking into the future with consideration for the changing operational landscape. And these considerations, as I mentioned before, include logistics, climate, and adaptive infrastructure. And with that, we will get started. Thank you. I'm going to ask one question first to get us all started. And each of you will have an opportunity to respond, and we'll take the discussion from there. So first question, what is an example of a technological challenge unique to your specific operational environment?
So I'll take that first. Hi, I'm Trent. Nice to see you all. Enjoyed the conversations we've had up to now. So I had kind of some things I wanted to say coming into this, and then my secretary gave an interview yesterday. And so now what I like to do is review some of the changes for the Army so that we can catch up. And I literally had to write them down. So there are about 6 new objectives. I wouldn't write this down. It'll be on the press today. So priorities for her, none of this will be all that surprising. Better sensing, convergence of effects, win the fires fight, protect what we have, sustain ourselves, allies, and partners. And then what's kind of really cool is, this is number 6, the ability to communicate across joint coalition partners as quickly as possible. So I'm like, rewind like an hour and a half ago and say Mary up here. I'm like, well, I guess I better get Mary to go talk to the secretary because I think we got that one done. So it's really neat to see and how quickly, like in real time, kind of we're trying to address these challenges, sometimes even before the services even understand they're a challenge. So in all seriousness, the thing I wanted to bring out, especially for the land domain and what the Army's facing in the, let's say, the 2030 timeframe, is kind of two-part response. One, we've already purchased that military, that Army. You know, the bills, the checks we're going to write this year and the next is really what you're going to see in 2030. So we're going to go to war with what we have. So what that leads us to think and talk about, though, is what are the gaps that are remaining so that we can mitigate those through what activities like and efforts that DARPA can bring to the table. But what is not really talked about often enough, in my circles especially, is kind of the transparency of the battlefield, right? A lot of us have talked about electromagnetic spectrum, and that's very kind of part of the normal lexicon. But what we don't, I don't think, could talk about enough is where the battlefield really begins. And where does that transparency need to be accounted for? So for me and for the soldiers and the 1.2 million folks that we have in the Army, transparency begins at home. It begins on the soldiers' Instagram accounts. It begins at the businesses that the reservists work at, right? And all of those areas that the adversary can target as early, well before we even decide there's going to be an issue. Right? So to me, and what I'd like to get across to audiences whenever I get a chance, is we really have to kind of reconsider our paradigms for where do vulnerabilities emerge, and to not consider the more traditional approaches that, especially the Army, has demonstrated over several decades, which is build up a mountain of metal and then go trouncing in. So if I were going to offer a technological challenge, it's not just the technology, but it's also just the awareness and the understanding that problem goes deeper and sometimes darker and earlier than I think we are really giving it credit for.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bach?
So yeah, I'll jump in on that.
Yeah, please.
So I'm Colonel Bishop, go by Bach. I have a call sign because I grew up as a fighter pilot. I flew F-15s, did initial cadre in F-35, and then most recently flew F-16s up in Alaska. What was really interesting about this conversation is all the things that Trent was talking about actually align very well to an airman's perspective in what our secretary is talking about that's important. Secretary Kendall has 7 operational imperatives that he is looking to modernize our capability in the Air Force and also the Space Force as well in order to be able to operate in the future future representative environments and all those unique challenges. So a good example of that is, what are the ways that we're going to integrate as different services and how are we going to communicate? There's a buzzword called JADC2, right? Joint All-Domain Command and Control. And how are we going to connect the land forces with the air forces, space forces, subsurface forces, all that together. I thought it was really interesting that Chairman Smith this morning, he mentioned about leveraging new technology for new platforms, but also new technical capability and the ability to process information in unique ways. And I think that's really interesting in this new operational environment. And we heard in the autonomy panel the importance of testing these capabilities in operationally relevant environments. So that's one of the key challenges that we have today. Like, how are we going to field this type of technical capability? And then perhaps even more importantly, it's not the technical challenges that we're facing, but today we started by discussing the human domain and the human challenges and how are we going to identify those challenges. And that's kind of one of the things that DARPA can really bring to the fight is the creativity that you find in an organization like DARPA, reaching out to industry, academia, and then government in order to identify what those technology possibilities might be. And then also, what are the policy implications of those technologies? As an example, in the Air Force, we're looking at collaborative combat aircraft in terms of how are we going to employ them, how are we going to have the tactics, techniques, and procedures, how are we going to have the trust, like Dr. Fisher was mentioning. And then what are the legal, moral, and ethical ramifications to this technology? I think that's an important part of avoiding strategic surprise. And that's what's really a neat thing about being an LNO at DARPA is having these conversations with the people in order to advance the way forward. So just some initial thoughts from what Trent was saying.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll jump on that real quick, Bach, too. First off, I want to point out that we didn't put the Marine at the end of the line, right? So I feel like I'm kind of moving up in the world, but we did put the Department of the Navy down here. 2 Marines, U.S. Marines, submarines, so stand by. We've got some great comments for you. So, I was prepared to come up here and talk about service objectives from the Marine Corps. I had some thoughts on mobility, on lethality, on readiness, material readiness, some great conversations about material capabilities. But I'm going to kind of go back to what Bach talked about. And I think we spend a lot of time and we kind of get a miscommunication on what it means when you talk about technology, right? I'm sure everyone's heard the saying, hey, are you going to equip the man or woman or are you going to man the equipment, right? And I think that foundational understanding that, hey, you are going to equip the man, you're going to equip the woman, you are going to equip them to go forward, whether soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen, Guardians going forward. And I think there's a huge focus on that. I know we've talked about sleep. We've talked about, hey, how do we get them the supplies that we need? What does mobility look like? But I will tell you that I think the fight that we're moving into right now from a Marine Corps perspective, where we're much more distributed, we talk about logistics and getting them out there, but how do we get left of that situation? How do we prepare the individual Marine to be prepared to operate in that environment? And I would say over the last 20 years, based on the operational experience up here, it's long periods of boredom or mundaneness followed by periods of terror, sheer terror, and violence. And I don't think that's a fight that we're going to get into next. I think it's going to be a little bit more sustained. And as you move across domains or you move across those thresholds of violence, being able to prepare that individual Marine, that sailor, that soldier, that airman to go out and do what they need to do is going to be great. And then I also think on the backside of that, how do we welcome them back post-deployment? How do we bring them back into the fold? And how do we ensure that they're the sustainable resource that we need in order to apply all these technology applications to those warfighting metrics? So a great point. I mean, talking about, the foundational item is the human in the loop, on the loop.
Yeah, so Nate, appreciate it. So it's kind of funny. So Nate and I hadn't actually seen each other for 24 years. So we're actually Naval Academy classmates that, we didn't know initially coming here, and then, bumped was like put the pieces together. So it's fantastic. So I took this question and I'll dive a little bit into the tactical because I gave it to my junior enlisted and my junior officers to kind of help me put together talking points for this. And anybody that questions this generation that's coming up right now hasn't met any of our teammates. They are absolutely fantastic. They are energetic, and I don't have, as being a dinosaur now, I don't have any, I'm ready to walk away and know that we're in good hands as a country. And they're ready for whatever gets thrown at them. So, so the way they approach this problem is they went at the technology and they looked bigger picture worldwide to see what the challenges were for UUV-RON and our unmanned vehicles. And so the thread they pulled was pretty interesting. And so if you look at the battery development, so we started with lead acid through nickel metal hydride and now lithium ion. And so they basically laid out like, hey, 75% of the world reserves for lithium are in Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. So basically a lithium triangle. But 75% of the battery production is actually coming out of China, right? And so if you look at the issues that we've had in the past where resources have been held against us and weaponized, this is another area where we're very susceptible. And so the technology challenge is, as we begin and continue to move away from fossil fuels, battery technology is a key component to being not reliant on those. And so as we go to war, if 75% of our batteries are coming from China, those could evaporate. And so what is the next battery technology that the United States could develop? And so we gain autonomy. And we don't have reliance on lithium as the single power source. Because right now, small and medium vehicles don't have a very long, they don't have a long life, right, without being recharged, right? So I need those batteries, and that doesn't, for these autonomous vehicles, whether it's, undersea, on the sea, or AUVs and the MQ-9 and et cetera, they're not going to operate without batteries. And so we've got to figure out what that next technology solution is, because our either relationships with the countries that have the lithium is going to be very imperative, or breaking into the manufacturing cycle that China continues to dominate us on. So that was a pretty interesting thread that the team pulled together on something that is going to absolutely be a problem for us when the shooting starts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I want to ask a question about logistics. You can't do your job without a robust logistics infrastructure and a vast infrastructure. So we talked about some of the challenges earlier with what we've been seeing with logistics in the last couple of years. What are specific logistical challenges that you foresee as the operational landscape is changing in your domains? And I'll open that up to anybody.
Yeah, I'll start off on that one, and we'll go reverse order wherever you guys want to jump in. So, logistics for me, to be able to move our vehicles is incredibly challenging. If we don't have them embarked on board of a submarine, having them transport on a surface ship or dropping out of an aircraft becomes challenging. But I think it's looking at the environment as global warming continues to happen. It's not just the logistics of today, it's the logistics of tomorrow, and then understanding and being able to develop solutions against the second and third order effects. So, for example, as the climate continues to warm, fish migration is going to change, which is ultimately going to change fishing patterns. And so areas where we were able to operate with autonomy and really freedom, now we're going to be challenged by changing fishing environments, right? As shipping continues to go up, that's going to have a second and third order effect. So we're going to have to use some of these AI solutions to actually do predictive modeling to help us understand these changes in the environment. So it's not just logistics, it's being predictive in what the challenge are we're going to face, because we can't continue to just solve today's challenges. We actually have to look out 20, 30 years, because that's what our peer competitors are doing, right? And they're working to influence and shape that battle space where we're just operating and responding to it.
Yeah, you take the term logistics as a whole picture. Marine Corps, we break ourselves down into a MAGTF, an aviation logistics and ground combat element. So we specifically speak about logistics, but it doesn't just apply to that aspect of the Marine Air Ground Task Force, right? I think if you were to ask me as an aviator, and an aviator that can't fly very far and very fast, because I'm a helicopter guy, right? I think the challenge is mobility. Right, and that could span across the offices at DARPA. You could take it from a strategic perspective all the way down to a tactical perspective. When you talk about mobility, moving something easily or to an accessible area, or you put a military spin on it, where you talk about taking a unit or a weapon system and then moving that to an objective area, I think that's going to be a huge challenge. And if you hear the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Commandant Berger, talk about it, it's not going to be, you're not going to get there and then fight. You are going to have to fight to get to the fight. And where does that fight start? I would argue that fight probably starts, we heard a little bit from Matt Turek yesterday, right? It probably starts on social media with your family. It probably starts with your bank account. It starts with the fact that I can't order that bolt that I need to fix the thing that I need to go where I need, let alone embarking on ship, embarking on airlift to get where we need to get, getting into an operational posture, and then stepping off, to meet a strategic intent. So I think those mobility challenges are going to be huge. And I don't think we only need to address it from a uniform perspective, but you see it right now. It's going to affect our families. There's going to be political will behind it. What is the image of the nation? Are we willing to go do the things we say we're going to do with all the twists and turns that come with that mobility? So when the time to come to cross a threshold to go to a fight, I think that mobility is going to start literally at home, directly in your house as an individual warfighter, all the way up to the point of contact, all the way up to the point of culmination, all the way up to the point where we declare victory or we recoup and we refight. So I think a mobility perspective is a huge challenge.
So I couldn't agree more. Like from the Air Force's perspective, we expect our logistics are going to be challenged from in the homeland, right? And because we're used to being able to deploy, like Trent was talking about, to our nearest ally to the conflict, and we build. That takes 6 months to build up, and we go employ, and we do it really well. Like that's the American way of war. With the operational environment of the future, we're not going to be able to operate uncontested. So from an Air Force perspective, we're very used to operating from large Air Force bases with lots of resources that's extremely efficient in terms of producing air power. The problem is they're also excellent targets.
Yep.
So when we look at operating in this environment, for example, in the Pacific, we're probably going to be forced to change our operational concepts. So we have this idea called Agile Combat Employment, or ACE operations in the Air Force. The idea is we might have to distribute, which makes it more effective because we're able to be agile and mobile. However, that's very inefficient. So the ability to get parts and water and food to these distributed locations will be very important. And I also kind of flipped the script a little bit is, that might be in the Pacific, but it also might be in the Arctic.
100%.
So when you were looking at the changing environment and global warming, I was a commander up at the 354th Fighter Wing outside of Fairbanks at Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska. And we saw a changing Arctic environment. So permafrost is changing. The sea lanes are opening up in that area, which is going to make it even more important from a geopolitical area of importance, which means we're going to have to be able to operate in that Arctic environment. So BTO has a lot of programs, Ann Cheever's ICE program, for example, in terms of, can we put topical solutions in order to prevent frostbite? As somebody that went through the Arctic Survival School, I think that would be really useful.
Please.
Yes.
Some of that.
And somebody that flew F-16s when it was negative 40 degrees out, if I have to eject, I want some more tools to be able to operate. So those are just some examples that come to mind.
Yeah.
It's funny, ice, and well, if you could stop ice from forming, can you just create ice? She's like, yeah. Anyway, so So contested logistics, and we've kind of talked about it in bits and fits and starts here today. I think this is where, and if you remember the 6 things my secretary said, one of them was how to sustain ourselves and sustain our partners and allies in a contested environment. And this is a big deal for the Army to actually say that out loud, right? And to say, okay, logistics is important. You know, as a logistician a long time ago, I've always felt that way and still feel very strongly about it. But now I feel strongly about it for strategic reasons. So when we think about the Pacific, when we think about the adversary, we should also accept that the adversary has been watching us for 20 years and watching us learn really bad habits, especially in terms of logistics, like we were just talking about, mountains of metal, stuff like that. FOBs, concept that's almost completely irrelevant now. But what it's done is it's created this culture of almost lazy thinking about logistics. So that is meant to be derogatory to my own service because we are now expected.
We'll take that one too.
Yeah, you get in line.
Sign me up.
Because the Army's is asked now as part of the Joint Force is to be that enabling function for the Joint Force when it comes to the Pacific. So when I say the adversary's been watching us, they understand our supply chain challenges. They understand how much we depend on bringing things with us and having huge, long requirements for food, water, fuel, etc. So as we start to, as DARPA starts to contribute to reducing that supply load, we should be thinking of that, how that translates immediately to soldier safety. Right, to soldiers that no longer have to drive and carry that fuel or to carry that water. And then also, operationally, how now I, as the person who is trying to make decisions about manning, can now say, I no longer need X number of truck drivers, now I can make those cyber professionals. Because at the end of the day, it's all about money, right? And how many X's, how many soldiers I can train. So that's how we think of it. In the, going out to the 2040 time space, because it takes a long time to train those folks. So when we see the big bets coming out of DARPA, right? When we see things like NOMARS that comes out, and my watercraft strategy for the Army is still talking about the 70s technologies for watercraft, and I drop NOMARS on top of them. They're like, oh, we can do that? Oh, well, let's rethink this. Let's kind of fracture the paradigms we currently have about logistics, and then it just kind of supercharges the imagination to allow kind of the curmudgeons in my own service to go, let's just think dynamically instead of traditionally. And last thing I want to say is kind of what I started out with, which is the strategic messaging of logistics. Sounds boring. It doesn't sound sexy at all. But the adversary's been watching us. And if they don't believe that we are able and willing to sustain large-scale combat operations, they're going to throw the BS flag from the very beginning. Deterrence is the objective. And you cannot convey deterrence if you cannot demonstrate your willingness to actually do what we need to do and do it for a really long time. To not plan for a short fight, to plan for a long fight, a sustained fight. And that's why, and I sound kind of dramatic, but I'm very passionate about the importance of these efforts that we're betting big now. They have to, because we will fail before we even try, because they're watching us. They plan decades in advance. And if they don't see us invest early, they know that we won't be ready when we need to be ready. Sorry.
I want to pull the thread just a little bit, Colonel Marvel, on before we move to the next question, on the mobility challenges that you were discussing. Can you give us a hint or insight into where you think a technology opportunity lies to address that?
Well, yeah, I think it's across the spectrum, ma'am. So I talk about, like they talk about NOMARS, right? It's the ability to move force structure as well. But I'll come back to my original point too, as well, is make the individual warfighter more resilient, right? So allow them to be. You hear Bach talking about, hey, we're operating in the Arctic. I eject as a fighter guy, and I got to be able to survive there, right? Transitioning across those things, as simple as it was, things we've talked about with sleep, we've talked about food, and we've talked about water. I think building resiliency will allow us to have more maneuver space when it comes to those mobility, right? Like from a material science, fascinated by material science, right? So I have a bolt that lasts only so long, right? Well, what if I can make that bolt last longer? Or think about the operating environment. that Jason's in, is fully unforgiving. We marinize helicopters so that we can take them on boats, let alone live underneath the water. I'm sorry, brother, I don't want to have any part of that, right? So I think broadening the maneuver space, to find those technologies that allow us to be those connectors or those lines of efforts that are very specific to it. I don't think it's just a piece of equipment. I think if you go down to the human aspects of it from a mobility and allow me to be more sustainable. You talk about, the ability to have blood, what happens when I am injured, or how do I present myself from being injured? What if I am sleep deprived? How do I build the amount of inertia that I need to in a battle space to win the fight, to maintain, after the battle's won? And I think that there's some great opportunities that DARPA does right now, especially across BTO, that allows those individuals to do those things. And I don't think we as a service, I won't speak for the others, the Marine Corps, we pride ourselves on the Marine, right? You're a United States Marine, you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. And then we say, okay, I need this new piece of equipment. Okay, we talked about it a little bit in the back, but guess what? The individual, right? I found it wholly ironic in the conversation with Phil Root and the Autonomy Council, which was great, where we talk about, I'm like, I'm here to listen about autonomy, and we talk about the human aspect of autonomy, right? The conversation about co-pilot was used multiple times. I fly multi-seat aircraft. I'm a Cobra pilot, right? Why is a co-pilot there? Because he's there to optimize my performance as I am part of the machine to accomplish my mission, right? I can't wait to steal that line. So I don't know who used it, but I'm going to go back to my leadership. I don't want to minimize the human aspect. I want to optimize the human aspect, right, to make it better. And I think that broadens that mobility space that I was talking about, ma'am.
Thank you. A lot of opportunity there for technology investments, I feel. Bach, you brought up the changing operational environment that, from your perspective, opening up the Arctic, the frostbite, the future operating environment there where we still have to supply and protect our warfighter. I'd love to hear, Trent, your perspective on why and how the Army is interested and addressing climate change.
No, that's great, thanks, because we don't get the chance to talk about the climate very often. And it's really weird because the Army is responsible for 14 million acres, right, across the planet. That includes Germany, Japan, Korea. And that's about the size of West Virginia, right? So we are very close to the land, not just because we train on it, but because we project from it, right? We live there, and we are hosts, we are custodians. I've heard the most senior people in my service just talk very passionately about why our connection to the land is so critical, and how that connection translates into relationships, not just with the communities domestically, but with communities across the world. And the Army's investment, as recently as last year with my current secretary, kind of comes about in two ways. One, climate strategy, which it's a strategy, it's a document, it's a glossy, but what it does do, it outlines some ambitious goals that I think we're already poking at, and we actually started talking about with batteries, but electrification of non-tactical vehicles, right, for installations, for U.S. installations. That's a lot of vehicles. I don't know the exact number, but we're talking thousands and thousands of vehicles that by 2035, I think, is the goal, to have them all electrified. Other things like carbon emissions and those aspirations that my secretary has laid out are very aggressive. Now, why bring it up is that that strategy has translated into decisions and modernization priorities. So when we choose now to spend money on modernization, we have to account for our impact on the climate, right? It's non-discretionary. We do it. We have to. Right? So that to me is a good signal of what we should be expecting in the next 10, 15 years as an appetite, as a demand signal for what the Army is ready to do. The second bit of that is kind of a more programmatic thing, and we're having what's called an implementation plan. It's supposed to lay out what's in the next 5 to 10 years, what kind of ambitious milestones we need to kind of kickstart this discussion, because it is a cultural shift for the Army. Not that we didn't have a connection with the land, like I just said, but our treatment and our relationship with it for the next upcoming generations, that requires effort, and we have to nurture that culture and raise our expectations of ourselves and of our incoming soldiers to account for that and to plan for that. Now, DARPA has all kinds of things cooking in this space, and the ones that really come to mind, I'll just do quickly, are programs that help us understand what we're doing to the environment while we're doing it to the environment, right? If we're hurting the environment, we're able to assess it and very quickly understand the impact and what we can do to then mitigate that impact,
or, as crazy as it is, well, maybe not crazy to you guys, but plant something that'll actually consume or transform that pollutant into something else, something less dangerous to the environment. See, so that kind of rapid awareness, that kind of quick response to changes in our environment is something the Army is very interested in, because we, like I opened with, are very close to the terrain, to the environment, and we're always looking for ways to be better stewards for not just our military and operational requirements, which I'm sure the rest of the guys will talk about, but for our future as Americans.
Jason, do you want to add anything about Navy's interest in mitigating effects
Yeah,
of
I
climate
mean,
change?
you know, not to make fun of the Army, but the world is 70%
Oh my, geez, I know what you
70%.
said
Well,
that.
I knew that was
just
coming.
70% water.
Even
right?
14
Marine-
billion
even the Marine
acres.
knows that.
So it's
That's
cool you got West Virginia.
West Virginia, that's right. Don't you have
I
a boat?
Oh, man.
Yeah, we do.
Could have picked a different state.
Strategic asset too. So I think you know. So as I look at the sea as a, you know, how it is impacted by climate change, there's a lot of problems to be solved there. So specifically, so for unmanned vehicles, you know, we're going to operate mostly in the littorals, right? That's where we're going to have to take the fight, and we have to have exquisite understanding of that environment. So with freshwater runoff, changing salinity, changing temperatures, small and medium vehicles right now, most of them don't have variable ballast systems. And so if you can't instantaneously compensate for those changes, you created a dart, right? Or something that's just going to bob on the surface and burn itself out as it tries to submerge. So with that is going to take an enormous amount of data gathering. We don't have the capacity to do that today. And so we need to figure out the infrastructure. You know, we work with Stennis. In fact, I'm headed down there to see some of the work that they're doing at NAVO to understand how we can get better at the nano level to be able to capture the environment, right? Huge amount of edge processing that's going to be needed to take in the sensor data that we're going to need, whether it's from satellites, in situ, UUVs, or other vehicles or other sensors out there, and how we can basically consume all that data to improve our models of the ocean. So we have really good, you know, environmental modeling of land. We don't know much about the ocean, and we definitely don't know a whole lot in our adversary's backyard, and we've got to get a lot smarter there, and it's going to take a lot of energy to get after that. So,
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a question from the audience. So this is for our panelists, and anybody can jump in if you feel. Given your experience with DARPA, do you have any recommendations to enhance DoD interactions with DARPA earlier in the development cycle?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So I would say just engage, right? Have those conversations early. One of the great things is L&Os is we get to work with PMs and link them up with the Department of Defense and our services. Good example is a couple weeks ago, we took some program managers and also Matt Turk, who spoke earlier in the program here, out to Luke Air Force Base, and they got to fly in F-16s. And flying an F-16 is amazing, speaking from experience. Yeah. But also they see what goes into like getting airplanes to fly and seeing what it's like to be on the flight line and deal with weather. Yeah. And when we get, you know, like fighter pilots and program managers together to talk about operational problems, goodness emerges for the development cycle. So that's a lot of fun, and one of the cool things about being able to serve with DARPA.
Yeah, and you know, and Bach, I'll make a kind of a selfish comment on that, right? So interactions with the DoD as a whole, right? It comes back to the professionalization of the force as well, right? So I was fortunate to get to spend a great time at DARPA. I got to work, you know, be mentored by guys like Phil Root, Tim Chung, you know, Dr. Peter Heinem. Like, I am who I am as an operational commander right now because I got to spend the time at DARPA. I got to learn. I had the humility to open the aperture and learn those things. And I can tell you that I'm a better operational commander because of it. The context and the insights that it gives us is super unique. But what I would say is, you don't have to be at DARPA to be an LNO to have those conversations. You know, any line unit, any young Marine, sailor, soldier, airman, anybody out there, have those conversations. They've got perspectives, and if you open that aperture and ask, you'd be surprised what you get back from it. And then it only takes one champion. Programmatically, it only takes one champion to carry that thing across the finish line, right? And it doesn't have to be somebody with eagles on their collars or let alone stars. It can be a young Marine. It can be anybody that gets it. So I encourage you to have those conversations early and don't just shoot on the big targets and people that are in places. You know, find the young Marine that it influences on a day-to-day basis, and you want to know what it looks like to sleep, eat, and live in the dirt for months at a time, right? talk to them, and they'll tell you what the challenges are, and then they'll probably give you some insight on what it's like to be a warfighter.
Jason, we only have a couple seconds left, but I'd love to hear your perspective as
Yeah,
a
so I
submariner.
don't fall directly in the circle of trust with these guys that have served inside of the brain trust. But what I would say is I have a lot of programs that run through UVRON, through DARPA, and I think it's really about the collaboration, right? Getting in, I think exactly what the question asks is early. Early and often is going to produce the best product, right? Because I think the previous discussion had mentioned, hey, if you build to what you know, you're really going to limit your ceiling.
You're absolutely right. This has flown by, but it has been a privilege really to be up here with you, and I want to thank you. So please join me in thanking our panel members.
Right.